They thought we wouldn't last a single cycle. They called us weak, fragile, unsuited for the void. The cold of deep space had claimed thousands of species before us, some with natural resistances, some with technologies far beyond our own. And yet, we were still here. The ZYYTH Dominion watched us with a mixture of amusement and pity. Reptilian, cold-blooded, and evolved in frigid wastelands, they ruled the frozen frontiers of the galaxy with an iron grip. Their bodies, naturally resistant to sub-zero conditions, had shaped their empire. They had no need for bulky protection, for layers of insulation, or redundant survival measures. They were born in the cold. It was their domain. So when humanity first stepped beyond its cradle and began expanding into deep space, the ZYYTH barely acknowledged us. They saw our reliance on technology as a crutch, not an advantage. They watched our spacefaring vessels, encased in thick hulls, wrapped in artificial warmth, and dismissed us as yet another warm-blooded species that would falter in the face of the void's uncaring silence. And yet, something about us unsettled them. It wasn't just our speed, how quickly we adapted, how relentlessly we pushed into the frontier. It wasn't even our resilience, our ability to endure environments that would have killed others. No, what disturbed them most was the way we refused to accept limitations. It started with a small outpost, a simple human research station, on the frozen moon of Eridani 6. The temperature plummeted to extremes beyond anything Earth had ever known. Winds howled to the blackened landscape, cold enough to freeze metal to the touch, to turn breath into shards of ice. To the ZYYTH, it was a test, a silent bet among their warlords. They gave the humans a year, no more. And then, to their surprise, the station didn't fail. It expanded. They sent drones, curious to see how humans were surviving. They expected to find borrowed alien tech, some form of shielding or external heat sources, keeping them alive. Instead, they found something far more unsettling, something the ZYYTH couldn't understand. The humans weren't just enduring the cold. They were mastering it. The first reports confused the Dominion strategists. The humans were walking through blizzards that should have turned them into statues. They were operating in conditions that should have shut down every biological function they had. And yet, they were moving, building, thriving. It wasn't natural. It wasn't possible. The ZYYTH Council convened in secrecy, debating theories. Had humans evolved faster than expected? Had they spliced their genes with some ice-resistant species? None of it made sense. No known mammalian species could do what they were doing. Finally, the Dominion's high strategist ordered an intervention. A simple, calculated move. Not an attack, yet, but a test. They would send a small team of infiltrators, specialists trained for deep space reconnaissance, to observe the humans firsthand. They would find the secret to their survival, and if necessary, they would end it. The infiltration team landed on Eridani 6 under cover of the eternal night. The air was so cold it should have shut down their equipment in minutes, but their bodies were built for this. Their scales thickened, their metabolism slowed, conserving energy in ways no human ever could. The cold was their ally, their greatest advantage. But what they saw in the human colony shattered their certainty. The humans weren't huddled inside their station, hiding from the elements. They were outside, working, unfazed, moving through the frozen terrain, as if it were nothing. Their breath fogged, their movement precise, their suits unnatural. The ZYYTH infiltrators had seen environmental suits before, clunky, inefficient, barely more than layers of insulation wrapped around weak bodies. But these were different. They weren't just protective, they were adaptive. One of the infiltrators risked moving closer, his camouflage blending him into the ice. He studied the humans in silence, watching as they adjusted their suits, as heat sensors flickered across their gear. He could hear the faint hum of technology, the rhythmic pulses of internal temperature regulation systems working in perfect sync. It was beyond anything the Dominion had ever developed. One of the humans turned, pausing as if sensing something. The infiltrator held his breath. The human's helmet reflected the icy wasteland around him, the visor dark and unreadable. For a moment, nothing moved. And then, to the infiltrator's horror, the human smirked. The ZYYTH barely made it back to their vessel. They had seen enough. Humans weren't just surviving the cold. They were playing with it, testing it, learning from it. They had taken the greatest threat of the void and turned it into something they could control. The high strategist read the report 3 times before he spoke. His advisors waited tense as they saw his expression shift from disbelief to something far more dangerous. Humans were a threat. The Dominion had always assumed superiority because they were born for the cold. But humans, they weren't born for anything. They weren't confined by nature's design. They didn't have to evolve to fit an environment. They simply made their own. And if the ZYYTH didn't stop them now, they might never get another chance. The ZYYTH had underestimated humanity. That was clear now, but they had yet to understand why. Their best infiltrators had returned shaken. Their reports filled with contradictions. They described humans walking freely through temperatures that should have shut down their bodies, wearing suits unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. To the ZYYTH, environmental suits had always been crude tools, bulky, inefficient, a desperate compensation for biological weakness. A species that needed one was, by definition, inferior to one that didn't. That belief had shaped their entire war doctrine. But now, the humans had turned that logic inside out. The high strategist ordered a full analysis. Every piece of data the infiltrators had collected was dissected. Every recorded movement, every energy signature. The Dominion's finest engineers worked tirelessly to explain what they were seeing. And the deeper they looked, the more unsettling the truth became. Humanity's survival on Eridani 6 wasn't fluke. It wasn't stolen technology. It was something far worse, a deliberate, methodical triumph of engineering. The suits weren't just shielding the humans from the cold. They were adapting to it. Layer by layer, the researchers pulled apart the data. What they found was a terrifying blend of biology and machine. Internal heat recycling. Instead of fighting the cold, the suits absorbed body heat, redistributed it, and repurposed it. No wasted energy. No unnecessary strain. Every calorie burned was another moment of survival. Adaptive insulation, not just layers of fabric, but a system designed to react in real time. The suits read their environment, shifting densities, sealing off weak points, channeling warmth where it was needed most. Oxygen efficiency. Even in thin atmospheres, the suit stretched every breath to its limit. Built-in filtration systems scavenged oxygen from ice particles, turning what should have been a death sentence into a resource. Redundant systems. If one part failed, another took over. If heat failed, emergency reserves activated. If insulation wore down, nanofibers realigned. If one source of warmth was lost, the suit found another. The ZYYTH had spent centuries refining their cold resistance, believing it made them superior. But humans had built their own. And then there was the most disturbing discovery of all. The mind behind the machine. The suits weren't just physical. They were psychological. Every human who wore one had been trained, conditioned, hardened for this reality. The cold wasn't something they feared. It was something they prepared for. ZYYTH warriors had limits, biological points at which their bodies couldn't sustain themselves any longer, no matter their willpower. But humans didn't stop at those limits. They pushed through them. The Dominion scientists tried to dismiss the findings. They insisted the suits had to be alien in origin, that no species could develop such technology on its own. But the truth was undeniable. The humans weren't using advanced shielding. They weren't relying on brute force. They had done something infinitely more dangerous. They had turned survival into an art. The high strategists knew what this meant. If humanity's technology had reached this level, if their mindset had already adapted to deep space warfare, then the ZYYTH had no choice. Humanity had to be stopped. Now, before they became unstoppable, the order was given. A fleet was mobilized, not for observation, not for diplomacy, but for war. The humans had defied the laws of nature itself. The Dominion would remind them who ruled the void. The ZYYTH fleet arrived in force. Not a warning, not an ultimatum, just the cold, unrelenting certainty of war. The Dominion had ruled the frozen frontiers for centuries. They had crushed countless species, shattered civilizations that could not withstand the Void's merciless grip. They expected humanity to break the same way. They were wrong. The first wave descended on Eridani. 6. Their warships blotting out the already darkened sky. Ice storms raged across the moon's surface, howling winds tearing through the terrain. Perfect conditions for the ZYYDH. Conditions that doomed their enemies time and time again. The attack was swift, precise, overwhelming. Squadrons of elite ZYYTH warriors, clad in their own survival gear, deployed onto the ice fields, intent on cutting to the human colony before reinforcements could arrive. But the humans weren't retreating. They were waiting. The ZYYTH soldiers advanced, their breath fogging in the frigid air. They had prepared for resistance, desperate defenses, last stands, the usual weaknesses of an outmatched enemy. Instead, what they encountered was something they had never seen before. The cold should have been their greatest ally, but for the first time in their history, it was being used against them. The first strike came in silence, not from energy weapons, not from heavy artillery, but from the environment itself. The ice beneath them groaned. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ground, precise and engineered. The humans hadn't just built their colony to survive the cold. They had studied it, manipulated it, weaponized it. Explosions detonated in the distance, not aimed at the ZYYDH, but around them, triggering controlled avalanches, sending walls of ice crashing down, cutting off retreat paths. The temperature plunged even further, a tactical move the ZYYTH had never encountered before. Their gear, designed to function within the cold, was now struggling against it. Their breath grew ragged, their movement slowed, and then the humans arrived. They didn't march in formation. They didn't charge recklessly. They moved with purpose, silent, methodical, perfectly adapted to the environment around them. Their suits weren't just keeping them warm. They were giving them the advantage. Thermal signatures shifted as human operatives vanished into the ice. Camouflage systems flickered, blending them into the landscape. Infrared tracking failed. The suits regulated heat so precisely that there was no excess to detect. The ZYYTH found themselves being hunted. A squad of warriors spotted movement, a single human standing against the storm. They raised their weapons. The human didn't move. The ZYYTH commander hesitated. Something was wrong. The human stance was calculated. A second later, the winds howled with unnatural force. Not random, not a natural storm, engineered air currents. The humans had redirected the weather itself. Snow and ice blasted to the battlefield, burying the ZYYTH's visibility, cutting them off from one another. Then the humans struck. Close quarters combat in freezing conditions should have been impossible. No species could maintain precision in such extreme cold, but the humans thrived in it. They moved faster, struck harder. Their suits didn't just protect them, they enhanced them. Strength augmentation, impact absorption, tactical synchronization. A ZYYTH soldier swung his blade, ceramic, superheated, designed to slice through armor. The human caught it. The suit absorbed the force, redirected the energy, and the ZYYTH warrior found himself flung backwards by his own momentum. Panic spread. The ZYYTH were losing, not because they were weaker, not because they were outnumbered, but because the humans had rewritten the rules of survival. The high strategist watched the battle unfold from orbit. His advisors whispered among themselves, searching for explanations, strategies, excuses. But there were none. Humanity had taken the one thing the ZYYDH had always relied on, the cold, and conquered it. This was no mere skirmish. This was proof. Humanity didn't just survive the void. They mastered it. And if they could do that, then there was no telling what else they were capable of. The ZYYDH had come to Eridani, 6 expecting a slaughter. Instead, they had walked into a lesson, one written in the cold, in the wind, in the bodies of their fallen. The high strategist could no longer deny the truth. The Dominion's greatest strength, its greatest weapon, had been turned against it, and humanity had barely tried. The battle was over before the ZYYTH fully understood what had happened. It wasn't just the environmental tactics. It wasn't just the technology. It was a mindset. Humanity didn't fight like any species the ZYYDH had ever encountered. They didn't rely on brute force. They didn't falter in the face of impossible odds. They didn't fear the cold, the dark, the emptiness of space. They embraced it. The surviving ZYYTH forces scrambled to retreat. Those who could still move fled back to their dropships, abandoning weapons, armor, their fallen comrades. The humans didn't pursue. They didn't need to. They had already won. From orbit, the high strategist stared at the tactical reports. Every assumption he had ever held, every certainty about how the galaxy worked, had been shattered. The Dominion had always believed that adaptation belonged to the strong, that only those born into hardship could survive it. But humans had shown something far worse. They weren't born into this. They weren't meant to be here. But they had made themselves into something that could survive anywhere. The suits, the strategy, the technology, it was all a symptom of something deeper. Humanity didn't just endure the impossible. They engineered themselves beyond it. That meant the ZYYTH weren't just fighting a new enemy. They were facing something far more dangerous. A species with no biological limits. The high strategist's claws dug into the console. His advisors waited for orders, their scales pale with unease. They had never seen him hesitate, never seen him afraid. And yet, he was, because he knew the truth now. This wasn't a war the ZYYTH could win. Not now, not ever. The retreat order was given. The warships turned, leaving Eridani 6 behind, leaving the humans to their frozen world. The Dominion had ruled the cold for centuries. They had believed themselves the masters of it, but now they understood they had never truly owned the cold. They had simply been waiting for humanity to claim it.